Our scriptures this morning remind us of some important things. Life is hard. Relationships are complicated. We will get hurt. We will get offended. But we cannot control the pain that we have to endure. We cannot control other people in our lives. We can only choose how we will respond. Joseph could not keep his brothers from the treacherous act of selling him into slavery. Joseph was not just in a little squabble with his brothers. It was not just some roughhousing and one of them got a black eye. This was much, much more serious than that. The only silver lining that we can really see from what happened to Joseph is that they decided not to murder him and decided to just instead sell him into slavery. So I guess it could have been worse. My youngest often says things like that when something bad happens. She'll say, well, at least we aren't dead. Or, well, at least the house didn't burn down, or something like that. Joseph had gone from beloved son with a home and a family and a future to a slave overnight. He, instead of railing against it or turning to violence, chose to, as a slave even, work to prosper himself. He ended up being the head slave in a big household and a trusted confidant. But then he was wrongly accused from after he deflected the advances of one of his owners and imprisoned. He could not get a break. But even while in prison, he endeared himself to the guards. He helped them with interpreting their dreams. He gained their trust and their respect, and he became their friend. Joseph's almost superhuman forgiveness of his brothers who had sold him into slavery, remember, in our text this morning, was not just an amazing one-time event, but part of a greater lifestyle for Joseph. A lifestyle of looking at his circumstances and choosing life, choosing hope, and choosing kindness. A lifestyle that showed his trust in God and allowed him to let go of the bitterness in his heart to offer compassion and kindness even to those who had hurt him most in his life, who had literally ruined his life. Terrible things happen in this world. As your pastor, some of you have told me some of your stories, and we have wept together. The immense evil that people are capable of and the way that people hurt one another with such alarming regularity is awful. What some people have had to go through in their lives is unconscionable. And if you have been hurt deeply, this is not a sermon about browbeating you into forgiving someone. If you have been treated unfairly, this is not a sermon about having to go and get together back with the abuser that hurt you or the person that hurt you and trying to work it out and to pretend like nothing ever happened. This is not a sermon like that. This is a sermon to remind you that through the resurrected Christ, there is hope. Anne Lamott likes to say that not forgiving someone is like trying to kill a rat by eating the poison yourself. The bitterness and anger and pain that we hold on to when we don't forgive and when we don't allow ourselves to give these pains over to God, they can poison us. They're toxic. God can set our hearts free. Our scriptures this morning are about lifestyle of living in an understanding of God's immense blessing and love for us, and allowing that to be our foundational reality. To to understand that the pain and suffering of our life that we've experienced, the terrible things that other people have done to us, do not overpower God's love and grace for us. That God's love and grace is our greatest reality. When we cling to that, when we rest in that, when we understand our belovedness and the care that God has for us, we are able to live in a lifestyle that is not ruled by bitterness or unforgiveness, but instead is governed by grace. Joseph did this. Jesus did this. They lived like this. What does it take for us to live like this too? I think integral to this kind of life where we understand the foundation of God's love and grace for us, and that is our greatest reality, is letting go. This is not an easy task. It's harder for some of us than it is for others. I personally hate letting go of control. 0 stars, do not recommend. And yet, it is the only way that we can allow God's reality of grace and love to govern our hearts and minds. When we understand that it is not our job to punish or judge, and we can let go of all outcomes, then we can start to walk a path where we can have our hearts set free, even without apologies that we deserve, even without explanations that we want, even sometimes without closure. When we're able to live in this greater reality in God's love and grace, we can choose hope, generosity, and kindness, just like Joseph did, allowing those that hurt us to flow into God's love that covers everything. Just allowing, we don't have to have them back in our lives, but just continue to give them back to God's love and light. When we live like this, we can find a way out of bitterness and out of pain and out of woundedness and into hope. But how? How, Pastor? How can we do this? I think we start by praying. Might be a prayer as simple as help. Might be a prayer as simple as I don't want to do this. But starting by imagining giving these things to God. Doing it as many times a day as we need. Another way is starting to practice kindness, even if it isn't our first instinct. To start giving the benefit of the doubt to others, and most especially ourselves, that we did the best we could with what we knew. And to start by focusing on what can be done to move forward into hope, rather than focusing on revenge or anger or what could have gone wrong. I think for many who have experienced deep woundedness, it's not just enough to pray, it's not just enough to try. Some of us may need therapy for these things. That is a God-given, amazing thing. It shows strength to try to work through these things. It's hard emotional work. We don't have to do these things on our own strength. We draw from the deep well of grace and love that God is constantly pouring over our lives. Some of us will be praying 3 times a day. Some of us need to go to counseling or therapy. Some of us simply need to allow and acknowledge that we do not have control of the outcomes. But no matter where we are on this journey, each of us can experience the greatest reality for each of us, and that is God's love and grace is our foundation. God's love and grace are sufficient for us in every moment. So, my beloved, live, forgive, choose to live in hope, and live in God's love in which you are embedded forever. Amen.